Phoenix Rising by Michael Anastas. Faith and I waited outside the door as bullets pounded against the steel around us. This time, I only had one weapon, a shotgun. My prime offense would be faith and what skill I had learned in my years as a Phoenix trainer. "You sure you want to carry on with this?" I asked. "You have to learn to fight with Pokemon sooner or later," she said simply. "Wait for the signal, just like Merlin said." I heard the faint spark of electricity in the distance. That has to be it. I kicked open the door, and sure enough, Merlin had just swung his blade at the oncoming soldiers. From 3 doors on my left, Darius, Andrew, and Cassie entered in the same way. A whip of the Pokeball, and our strongest Pokemon stood before us. Prissatung, Halberdier, Ungermax, and Hex, whom I had recently acquired. The soldiers looked on with awe. "Could someone please tell me what those are?" said Giovanni. And then we attacked. "Prissatung! Whiplash!" shouted Cassie. "Ungermax! Twin Gatling!" shouted Darius. "Halberdier! Skewer!" shouted Andrew. I waited as the combat veteran Pokemon charged their opponents. By their commands, Halberdier pointed his upper halberds forward and slashed at the first 2 men that got in his way. Ungermax pointed his cannons forward and released 2 rounds of bullets, sending one of the helicopters flying off in 17 different directions. Prissatung rolled out his tongue and, as odd as this may sound, bitch-slapped the first 5 men who came near it. "My turn," I said with as much enthusiasm as I could. "Hex, Brain Tsunami!" It was one of his hypnotic attacks, and a fairly devastating one at that. Hex selected his opponent, and when he got close enough, I could actually see his telepathy going to work. I knew it was working because I could literally see his target's head throbbing. Faith, you know what to do. Faith, being Faith, knew what she was supposed to have done, but decided a fire spin would be more fun than what I had in mind. I never actually saw where the poor bastard landed. Wherever he went, he was probably having a better time than the others. "This is madness!" shouted Giovanni as he lifted Meowth up by the scruff of his neck. "What happened to all those weird powers the Wraith gave you that you raved on about?" "I don't have them anymore!" Meowth pleaded. "If I did, I'd be trying to kill you!" Giovanni threw him to the ground. "You are worthless!" His soldiers weren't doing any better. Out of the 50 he had brought, 30 of them were on the ground, not moving, and 10 were trying to crawl away. Jesse and James jumped down from the roof. "This looks like fun," said Jesse. "But it looks like they're already done," said James. The remaining 10 surveyed the battlefield, sizing up the odds of what would most likely happen, and in that time, Andrew's Halberdier launched his boomerangs, and half of them were knocked out. Before the others could react, Faith had them caught in a fire spin. They landed a few 100 feet off, but it wasn't half as far as the first guy had gone. Giovanni now stood alone, with only his Persian to protect him. You haven't won yet," he said in a panic. "Persian, scratch attack!" His Persian looked back at him, completely confused. "Well, what are you waiting for?" Cassie's Prissatung seized the advantage, and scooped up the helpless Persian and wrapped it in its tongue 3 or 4 times, to the point that it was cocooned. Giovanni's eyes were filled with fear. "Dear God!" Merlin stepped up. "Giovanni, can I presume that you're ready to surrender?" Giovanni was silent. "G, say something." "Mother of God!" He turned around and ran to the edge of the ship. He stepped up on the safety rail and leaped over. Then we heard the voice. "Oh no you don't. Nobody is getting off this boat." Giovanni came back on the deck, hovering through the air, and it was then that we saw the black cloud overhead. "Thought I was dead, didn't you?" laughed the Wraith, the one who had taken over Meowth's body. "Don't worry. If you're lucky, you'll live through this." I remembered nothing after that. Only a surging pain flowed through my body, like every cell inside of me was being torn apart. I heard on the news later that the entire ship had burst into flame. It had been said that nothing could have survived. Ash awoke staring up at the moon. He felt nauseous, his intestines trading places inside of him, and as his eyes came to focus, he realized that he was lying on a piece of the Melbourne. He sat up in surprise, and his eyes came down on what was left of the ship. Only the hull remained intact, still above the open waters. Black debris was scattered endlessly amongst the pool of flames, burning fuel from the engine. Ash stumbled to his feet and scanned the area, searching for survivors. There were hundreds, maybe thousands on board the Melbourne. Now there wasn't a trace of a single survivor, only himself. Then he noticed the refinery, blacker than the black of night, standing strong behind the burning hull. It was from there that the death of thousands had originated. Ash clutched the handle of his sword and slowly pulled it out and held it before him. "This has gone far enough," he said through clenched teeth. "Paradise City was over the limits, but this is far beyond acceptance." His sword fell from his hands, and Ash fell to his knees. "No more victims," he said, teary-eyed. "Please!" "Ash! Merlin!" Ash looked up. "Andrew? Andrew! Ash!" Andrew leapt across the remnants of the ship with grace through the ocean's flames and came to land on the giant chunk of ship which Ash rested on. "Thank God you're alive!" Ash slowly nodded. "And you. Hey, stand up. It's not as bad as it looks." Andrew pulled Ash to his feet. His expression was half that of sadness and half of hope. Everyone below the deck was killed. However, there were no bodies to be found." "Huh? Don't you see? It's the work of the wraiths. They're only after us, members of Ragnarok, and the organization that killed them last time." "Excuse me? Don't you remember? The refinery was a research laboratory, just like the one in which the first Mewtwo was born." And it was then that a giant metaphorical safe dropped down from the heavens and landed on Ash's head. "Something just occurred to me," said Ash. "The report said that the wraiths were created in a laboratory experiment, but Meowth said that he and Giovanni made a deal with the wraiths a few years ago." Andrew stopped moving for what seemed like an hour. "I wish I could explain that," he stuttered, "but you know more than I do." He took a deep breath. "Whatever. We'll figure it out once we get there." He turned around, began to walk away, and then looked over his shoulder. "We're still missing 3 people. Misty, Surge, and Merlin." He turned back to Ash. "The others are still out looking, and I think you should as well." From his pocket, he took out a small ring. "You know what this is, right?" "I've seen them before. Tracer rings?" A tracer ring was, in general, a homing signal which worked kind of like the electronic game of hide-and-seek, where the tracker beeped depending on where the signal was coming from. "Keep it with you. The others all have trackers. Just put it on so they know you're there." He turned his back to him. "Where are we all meeting?" "Just head towards the hull," Andrew shouted back. "You'll see it once you get there." He ran to the edge of the raft and leapt into the surrounding flames, and then he was gone, off to find the others. Ash took a deep breath. "I guess if I just jump, I'm sure to land on something." He ran in the opposite direction, leapt towards the fire, sailed through, and came to rest on the next steel raft. "This is easier than it looks." The leaping flames no longer intimidated Ash, and he almost came to welcome the next leap of faith. It became a kind of game in due time, seeing how far he could leap from debris from raft to raft, or how high over the flames he could go. The shackles of death of others no longer tugged at his legs, and Ash felt ready to conquer whatever came in his way. He came upon the former door of the concert hall and saw what he had been looking for. Misty remained unconscious on the other side of the raft, face down on the damp wood. Ash took one step closer and fell back with the wave which had suddenly come from no possible location. Only when the wood splintered did he find the source. Serpentor, the evolved form of Gyarados, standing 30 feet above the flaming pool. "There's something you don't see every day," Ash stated calmly as he drew his sword and pointed it Serpentor's way. "It's clear by your entrance that you are a minion of the race and your intentions are hostile." The Serpentor roared in response. "Then here is your chance. Either back off now or feel the burn." Serpentor eyed Ash, and his eyes turned blood red. "I thought you would. Pikachu!" Pikachu's Pokeball sailed through the air and popped open, releasing the little electric rodent which had served his purpose for 5 years. "Pika!" His eyes fell on Serpentor. "That you?" "Pikachu, don't give up already." He held his sword before him. "Remember, we outnumber him." Pikachu nodded. A single bolt of electricity struck the stone dead on, and Ash's blade lit up in the white light, blinding to the eyes in the dark night. Nobody could have not seen it. "All right," said Ash as he held his sword before him. "Let me show you what I've been through." The Serpentor lunged, and Ash jumped off to the side and swung his sword, filling Serpentor with electricity. It reared back in pain, but still managed to swing its scythe tail in Ash's direction. Ash leapt over it and removed it with his sword. "Serpentor, I'll save you!" A dark figure leapt through the flames, taller and thinner than Ash, and wielding an axe, blackened by the same flame which had adopted to the late Gary's blade. He swung his axe in Ash's direction and missed. "The Wraiths always have something else to throw at us, don't they?" He leapt over the axe as it sailed under his legs and brought down his sword, which was blocked by the axe's handle. There they remained, each trying to force the other to the ground. "Serpentor, now!" The giant Pokemon lifted its bloody tail into the air. Pikachu leapt to the rescue and was easily discarded. He sailed over the flames and came to rest on the next debris float. "Pikachu!" Ash's grasp on the blade lessened, and it soon sailed over his head, coming to rest beside his fallen companion. "Aha!" shouted the minion. "I win after all!" He swung at Ash rapidly, each time missing by inches, until Ash found himself cornered with a wall of fire. "I should savor this moment, and to think the Wraiths doubted me." And it was then that Serpentor, standing tall behind him, exploded. The minion turned back in shock, and it was then that Ash recalled his ability of telekinesis, extended his hand, and his sword came right back into his hand. Just as the minion looked back, Ash drove it through his heart, and released whatever power still remained. There was a flash of light, and not a trace of either the minion or his Serpentor could be found. Merlin leapt through the flames, and just narrowly struck the edge of the raft, stumbling to a halt before his pupil. "Perfect timing," said Ash. "You gave the perfect signal," said Merlin between breaths. "Just don't expect me to come to the rescue every time."